Right now, at this exact moment, something is happening inside the American mortgage market that your bank is not putting in your monthly statement, that your loan servicer is not explaining in your customer portal, and that the financial press is describing in numbers so abstract that their real meaning is being lost entirely. What is happening is this. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York just published data showing that total American household debt has reached $18.8 trillion. Mortgage balances alone have climbed to $13.2 trillion. 4.8% of all outstanding debt is in some stage of delinquency, the highest rate since before the 2008 financial crisis. Late-stage mortgage delinquencies, meaning borrowers who are 90 or more days past due, rose 18.6% in December of 2025 compared to a year earlier. Foreclosure filings have been rising for 12 consecutive months, with 38,840 properties in foreclosure in February of 2026, up 20% year over year. And a professional in the mortgage servicing industry, the president of DLS Servicing, stated publicly and on the record in January of 2026 that foreclosures will increase beginning in the second quarter of 2026, with a steady increase over the next year. That is this quarter, right now. Beginning now, a foreclosure increase that a mortgage industry professional predicted months in advance is beginning to materialize in the data at this exact moment. And yet, if you call your bank today and ask them about the health of the mortgage market, they will tell you that everything is fine, that their loan portfolio is performing well, that standards are strong, that this is nothing like 2008. They are not lying. But they are also not telling you everything. Because what the data reveals when you look at every layer of it simultaneously, when you understand the specific mechanism of the mortgage trap that is tightening around millions of American homeowners right now, is that the gap between what banks will tell you publicly and what the Federal Reserve's own data shows is wider than at any point since the period immediately before the last housing crisis. And the investors, the homeowners, the home buyers, and the people with money in banks that hold mortgage portfolios who understand that gap will navigate the next 12 to 24 months in a fundamentally different position than those who are relying on their bank's reassurances. This video is going to show you every layer of the mortgage trap, how it was constructed, who is most at risk right now, what the banks are not telling you about the specific mechanisms by which their own portfolios are deteriorating, what the housing reset means for anyone who owns property, wants to buy property, or holds stock in any financial institution with significant mortgage exposure, and the specific exit strategies and protective actions that people in every position in the housing market can take right now before the second quarter foreclosure acceleration that the industry predicted becomes the story that financial television is finally forced to cover. Every number in this video is verified, sourced from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Bankrate, Liberty Street Economics, the New York Fed Consumer Credit Panel, Lending Tree, the National Mortgage Professional Publication, Foreclosure Data Hub, and the most current market data available as of April 14 of 2026. Let us build the complete picture. The mortgage trap begins with a number that almost every American homeowner knows, but is not fully internalized in terms of its practical financial implications, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. As of April 13 of 2026, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate stands at 6.24%, according to Bankrate's daily lender survey. 6.24. That number is the lowest it has been since early 2022. If you are listening to financial media today, you will hear that number described as encouraging progress, as a relief for buyers, as evidence that affordability is slowly improving. And within a very narrow frame of reference, each of those characterizations has some merit. But the narrow frame of reference is the problem, because 6.24% is not being compared against the relevant baseline. It is being compared against 7%, against 6.7% from last year, against the rates of the last 2 years. It is not being compared against 3%. It is not being compared against the rate at which the majority of the 53 million American households with a fixed rate mortgage locked in their loan. And that comparison, the comparison between what homeowners currently pay and what they would have to pay if they moved, is the specific mechanism that has frozen the American housing market in a state of structural dysfunction that is now producing the delinquency and distress data visible in every serious analysis published in the first quarter of 2026. Here is the arithmetic of the mortgage trap at its most direct. A $400,000 mortgage originated in 2021 at 3% carries a monthly principal and interest payment of approximately $1,686. The same $400,000 mortgage at 6.24%, which is today's rate, carries a monthly payment of approximately $2,461. That is a difference of $775 per month, $9,300 per year, for the same loan balance on the same home. The person who locked in at 3% cannot sell and move without immediately and permanently increasing their housing cost by $9,300 annually, all else being equal. So they do not sell, they stay, they are locked, they are trapped, and the trap compounds in a direction most people have not considered, because the person who is trapped in their 3% mortgage is not just unable to move freely. They are also holding an asset whose market value is declining in real terms. The American Enterprise Institute Housing Center, which we discussed in prior analysis, is projecting that national single-family home prices will go negative in the first 3 weeks of April 2026 and remain negative for 3 consecutive years. For a homeowner who bought at the peak of the pandemic-era frenzy, who is locked into their low-rate mortgage, who lives in one of the 28 of the 53 largest metropolitan areas that are already recording year-over-year price declines, the mortgage trap has 2 teeth. One on the income side, where selling means permanently higher housing costs. One on the asset side, where staying means watching the equity that represents their largest store of wealth slowly erode. Neither option is comfortable. And for the specific group of homeowners who are most exposed to both simultaneously, the only outcome the trap allows is default. This is what the New York Fed data is beginning to document. Not a systemic crash, not a 2008 repeat. Something more specific, more granular, more painful in its concentration, and more significant in its structural implications. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York's own economists stated in their February 10th Liberty Street economics post that, and I am paraphrasing carefully for accuracy, mortgage delinquencies are near historically normal levels, but the deterioration is concentrated in lower income areas and in areas with declining home prices. Concentrated. The word matters. The stress is not evenly distributed. It is not a national crisis. It is a crisis in specific zip codes and specific income brackets and specific housing markets where the combination of locked-in affordability pressure, declining home prices, and rising cost of living has eliminated every buffer that was protecting the homeowner from default. In the lowest income zip codes, the 90-plus day mortgage delinquency rate surged from approximately 0.5% in 2021 to nearly 3% by the end of 2025, a 6 times increase in serious delinquency in 4 years. In high-income zip codes, the delinquency rate remains at historically low levels. The divergence is not subtle. It is a factor of 6 gap between the top income quartile and the bottom income quartile of American mortgage holders, and in counties with rising unemployment, which is a category that describes an expanding number of communities in the current environment given the 294,000 jobs cut in the first quarter of 2026 alone, the delinquency worsening was 0.6 percentage points versus just 0.2 percentage points in stable employment counties. The geography of default is not random. It follows the geography of financial stress with the precision of a heat map, and the heat map is getting brighter in the Sun Belt, in lower income communities in Florida and Indiana and South Carolina and Texas, in exactly the markets where the pandemic-era construction boom produced oversupply that is now driving the price declines that the New York Fed identifies as a co-driver of delinquency deterioration. Check. Verified. Undeniable. Now let us talk about the specific data that banks will not highlight in their customer communications, because this is the layer that most individual homeowners and mortgage holders are completely unaware of, and it is the layer that changes the risk calculus in ways that matter directly. The first hidden data point is the FHA delinquency rate. Federal Housing Administration loans, which are government-backed mortgages designed to help lower-income and first-time buyers purchase homes with down payments as low as 3.5%, now carry a delinquency rate of 11.52%. 11.52%. That means 1 in 9 FHA borrowers is currently delinquent on their mortgage payment. To put this in perspective, the conventional loan delinquency rate is approximately 1.78%. FHA delinquency is 6.5 times higher than conventional loan delinquency, and FHA loans now make up nearly half of all serious delinquencies nationwide, according to analysis published in early 2026, even though they represent a much smaller fraction of total mortgage volume. This concentration of distress within a specific loan product is not an accident. FHA loans allow debt-to-income ratios of up to 50% on the front end, meaning borrowers can qualify with mortgage payments that consume half of their gross income. Donna Schmidt, president and CEO of DLS Servicing, stated explicitly that the FHA default surge is the result of origination policy that allows up to 50% front-end debt ratios, meaning any bump in the budget can lead to mortgage default. Any bump, a medical expense, a car repair, an insurance premium increase, a layoff, any single unexpected cost that disrupts the cash flow of a household already operating with zero margin. And the insurance premium increases in states like Florida, Texas, and California have been anything but unexpected. They have been documented, quantified, and relentless. Insurance premiums have jumped 30 to 60% in those states. A homeowner in coastal Florida who bought in 2022 at pandemic-era prices with an FHA loan at a low-rate buydown, whose insurance premium has risen 40%, whose home value has declined 9.6% in Cape Coral over the past year, and who faces a property tax assessment based on the inflated purchase price rather than the current market value, is not experiencing a budgeting inconvenience. They are experiencing the sequential tightening of every financial constraint simultaneously. And the moment any single one of those constraints exceeds their capacity to absorb it, the path to delinquency opens, not because they were reckless, because the system they trusted was not built to protect them from that convergence. The second hidden data point is the total household debt context in which the mortgage stress is occurring. Americans owe $18.8 trillion in household debt. Mortgage balances represent 70.1% of that total. Credit card debt has reached $1.28 trillion, with 12.7% of credit card borrowers in serious delinquency in the fourth quarter of 2025. Auto loan balances stand at $1.67 trillion. Student loan balances at $1.66 trillion, with a 9.6% delinquency rate on 90-plus day overdue student loan balances. These are not independent variables. They are co-pressures hitting the same household budget simultaneously. A family carrying a mortgage, a car loan, student loan balances, and a credit card balance does not experience each of those as a separate financial challenge. They experience all of them together in competition for the same monthly cash flow. When energy costs rise 24% in a month, as they did during the peak of the Iran conflict oil shock, that energy cost increase does not come from a separate budget. It comes from the same budget that serves every other obligation. And the budget does not expand to accommodate it. Something gives. The third hidden data point is new home inventory, which is a forward-looking indicator of housing price pressure that banks with mortgage portfolios are monitoring closely, but not discussing with customers. New home inventory rose to 476,000 units in January of 2026, and at the current sales pace, it would take 9.7 months to clear that supply. 9.7 months. A balanced market is 6 months. The last time new home inventory was at 9.7 months supply, it was 2008. Reuters reported this figure in March of 2026. It was not headline news. It was not discussed in the same breath as the housing market reassurances that dominate financial media. But every professional housing analyst who tracks the inventory to sales ratio understands what 9.7 months of new home supply means in a market where mortgage rates are holding above 6%, and consumer confidence is at the levels described by 72% of Americans surveyed by Pew Research who view economic conditions as fair or poor. Now let us look at 3 historical moments where the specific mortgage trap mechanism played out with the same architecture, because the pattern of concentrated delinquency building behind reassuring averages is a consistent feature of every housing crisis in modern financial history. The first example is the period from 2005 through 2007 in the United States. In 2005 and 2006, the aggregate mortgage delinquency rate in America remained low by historical standards. Lenders were publishing reassuring statistics. Economists were citing overall portfolio performance. The housing market had been rising for a decade, and the aggregate data showed that only a small percentage of borrowers were in default. What the aggregate data was hiding was the concentration of a specific type of loan, the adjustable rate subprime mortgage, in a specific segment of the borrower population in specific geographic markets. When interest rate resets on those adjustable rate loans began to trigger, the concentration that had been averaging out in the aggregate statistics became visible as a cascade of defaults in specific zip codes: Florida, Nevada, California, Arizona. The markets where the concentration was highest experienced declines of 30 to 50% in home values. The aggregate data had been accurate. It had been truthful, and it had been completely misleading about the true distribution of risk within the system. The second example is the United Kingdom's mortgage stress period from 2022 through 2024. When the Bank of England raised rates aggressively to fight post-pandemic inflation, the impact was not uniformly distributed across British mortgage holders. Homeowners, who had fixed-rate mortgages with terms of 2 to 5 years, began facing their fixed-rate periods expiring and being forced to remortgage at dramatically higher rates. The Bank of England termed this the fixed-rate cliff. Millions of borrowers whose monthly payments were about to reset dramatically upward as their fixed terms expired. British banks reported that individual borrowers would face payment increases of hundreds of pounds per month. The UK government and the Bank of England began developing mortgage relief frameworks because they understood that the concentration of expiring fixed-rate mortgages in a specific 2 to 3 year window represented a systemic risk that the aggregate delinquency data, which remained modest, was completely failing to convey. The lesson: aggregate stability can coexist with severe concentrated stress, and the transition from concentrated stress to systemic problem is a function of duration and scale, not of whether the average number looks alarming. The third example is Ireland from 2010 through 2013. Irish banks, following the 2008 global financial crisis, were sitting on enormous portfolios of non-performing mortgages in a market where home prices had fallen 60% from their peak. The banks engaged in what regulators and economists described as forbearance, the practice of modifying or extending terms for delinquent borrowers rather than immediately initiating foreclosure, in order to avoid recognizing losses that would have required massive capital injections or bank failures. The practice maintained the appearance of functioning mortgage markets for longer than the underlying reality justified. When the Irish government ultimately forced banks to recognize their losses through stress testing in 2012 and 2013, the recapitalization required to restore solvency across the Irish banking system totaled approximately 64 billion euros, a staggering sum for a country with a GDP of approximately 200 billion euros at the time. The lesson? Banks have both the incentive and the legal flexibility to delay recognition of mortgage portfolio losses. They do not have to tell you the full story in real time. The full story arrives when it can no longer be deferred. Now let us apply the complete framework to your specific situation. Whether you are a homeowner, a prospective buyer, a renter navigating a changing market, or an investor with exposure to financial institutions that hold mortgage portfolios. The action framework here is specific, practical, and based entirely on publicly available data rather than prediction. The first thing to understand is where you are in the mortgage trap spectrum. There are three distinct positions, and each requires a different response. The first position is the locked homeowner, someone who purchased between 2019 and 2022 at a rate between 2.5% and 4%, who has substantial equity built from the pandemic-era price appreciation, but who is now watching prices stagnate or decline in their market and cannot move without a permanent payment increase. The locked homeowner's primary risk is not default. It is opportunity cost and asset value erosion. Their mortgage payment is affordable, their equity is declining. Their optimal strategy involves assessing whether the equity they currently hold, which may be near its peak in their specific market, is better protected by acting now rather than waiting for the AEI projected 3-year price decline to compound. This is not a recommendation to sell. It is a framework for analyzing whether an action is actually the passive safe choice it is often assumed to be when the asset underlying the mortgage is projected to decline in value for multiple years. The second position is the stressed homeowner, someone who purchased between 2021 and 2023 in one of the overheated markets, often using an FHA loan or a loan with a low initial rate that has since expired or is consuming a high percentage of their income, who is facing the convergence of rising insurance costs, property tax assessments based on peak prices, and flat or declining home values. The stressed homeowner is in the group that the New York Fed's data is describing when it discusses delinquency concentration in lower income zip codes and areas with declining home prices. The specific actions available to the stressed homeowner in order of preference are as follows. Contact the loan servicer immediately before missing a payment, not after. The Experian data published in January of 2026 explicitly states that the majority of FHA borrowers who enter distress and request loss mitigation do so between origination and year 4, and that early intervention produces the best outcomes. Loss mitigation tools available from servicers include forbearance, loan modification, repayment plans, and deferral arrangements. These tools exist. They are required by law to be made available. They are not prominently advertised because servicers incur administrative costs from implementing them, and because borrowers who do not ask do not receive them. Ask before the default, not after. The moment a payment becomes difficult, contact the servicer. The 21-day clock on a bank levy described in a prior analysis is the equivalent, in the mortgage context, of the timeline before which options exist and after which they narrow dramatically. The third position is the prospective buyer, someone who has been waiting for the right moment to enter the housing market and is now watching mortgage rates at 6.24% with a market that is simultaneously showing price declines in Sunbelt and West Coast markets and price stability or modest appreciation in Midwest and Northeast markets. The prospective buyer faces the specific inventory paradox described in April 2026 mortgage market analysis. Lower rates can push prices higher by bringing more buyers in, but the current market has 9.7 months of new home inventory nationally, which creates downward price pressure that counteracts the rate-driven demand increase. For the prospective buyer, the strategic framework is geographic rather than temporal. The question is not whether to buy in 2026. The question is where. The AEI data showing that Cape Coral, Florida, has lost 9.6% of its value in 1 year, while Kansas City has gained 8.6%, is not abstract market analysis. It is a direct signal that the same monthly mortgage payment buys dramatically different financial outcomes depending on whether it is applied in a declining Sunbelt market or an appreciating Rust Belt market. The fourth thing to understand is the insurance trap that is compounding the mortgage trap for homeowners in high-risk states, because this is the specific variable that is most consistently absent from bank communications, but most consistently present in the delinquency data for the markets experiencing the steepest price declines. Insurance premiums have risen 30 to 60% in Florida, Texas, and California, according to data published in the foreclosure analysis from early 2026. Some coastal Florida counties have seen homeowner insurance premiums double or triple in 2 to 3 years, as insurance companies have exited the market or dramatically repriced risk in response to repeated severe weather events and litigation costs. A homeowner whose monthly housing cost was calculated at origination based on an insurance premium that was $150 per month and is now $400 per month has had their effective housing cost increased by $3,000 per year without any change in their mortgage terms and without any increase in their income. That $3,000 per year is not a discretionary expense. It is a mandatory cost tied to the mortgage covenant, which requires the homeowner to maintain insurance as a condition of the loan. Failing to maintain insurance triggers lender-placed insurance, which is even more expensive, is non-negotiable, and which the lender can add directly to the mortgage payment, converting what was a manageable payment into a payment that exceeds affordable limits without the borrower having any practical recourse, except to sell the property or default. The fifth element is understanding the specific relationship between the housing reset and the equity cushion that is being cited by banks and real estate professionals as the primary reason this housing correction will not become a crisis. The argument goes as follows. Homeowners today have substantial equity, unlike 2008 when many borrowers were underwater. That equity provides a buffer because a homeowner in financial stress can sell conventionally, pay off the mortgage, and walk away with cash rather than facing foreclosure. This is true for homeowners who purchased before 2021 and who live in markets where prices are stable or rising. It is increasingly less true for homeowners who purchased at or near the pandemic era price peaks in the markets that are now declining, where the equity cushion that was present at origination is being eroded by the price declines the AEI is projecting. A homeowner who purchased in Cape Coral in 2021 with a 10% down payment on a $500,000 home has approximately $50,000 of initial equity. After a 9.6% price decline in the past year, their home is worth approximately $452,000. Their mortgage balance, after 2 years of payments, is approximately $430,000. Their equity is now approximately $22,000, down from $50,000 at origination. If prices decline an additional 2% per year for 2 more years as AEI projects, their equity will be approximately zero. At that point, the protection that banks are citing as the fundamental difference between now and 2008 no longer exists for that homeowner. The protection was real when it was cited. It is being eroded in real time in the markets where the protection was thinnest. Here is the complete picture of what banks are not telling you, assembled from the sources that the banks themselves consult but do not share with retail customers. Total household debt is at $18.8 trillion. Mortgage balances are at $13.2 trillion. 4.8% of all outstanding debt is delinquent, the highest since pre-2008. Late-stage mortgage delinquencies rose 18.6% year over year. FHA delinquencies are at 11.52%, 6.5 times the conventional loan rate. New home inventory is at 9.7 months supply, matching levels seen at the start of the 2008 crisis. Foreclosure filings rose 20% year over year in February of 2026 to 38,840 properties. Bank-owned properties increased 35% year over year in February of 2026. An industry executive publicly forecasted foreclosures will increase beginning in the second quarter of 2026, with a steady rise over the following year. The 90-plus day delinquency rate in the lowest income zip codes has risen 6 times, from 0.5% to 3% since 2021. Insurance premiums have risen 30 to 60% in Florida, Texas, and California. 28 of the 53 largest American metropolitan areas are recording year-over-year price declines. The AEI projects, national single-family home prices, will go negative in April of 2026 and decline for 3 consecutive years. Major housing expenses exceed historic affordability norms in 96.6% of United States counties, analyzed in the first quarter of 2026. A typical mortgage payment now consumes over 30% of median household income, up from 21% pre-pandemic. For mortgage rates to restore pre-pandemic affordability, either rates would need to fall to 2.65%, median household income would need to rise 56%, or home prices would need to drop 35%. None of these is likely in the near term. None of that information is secret. All of it is in public documents. Federal Reserve research, New York Fed quarterly reports, bank rate surveys, industry publications. The data is available to anyone who assembles it. The specific function of this video is to assemble it and explain what it means in plain language, because the banks that hold your mortgage and the servicers who process your payments have a structural incentive to not assemble it for you. Their incentive is to maintain the narrative that their portfolio is performing well and that you should feel confident in your banking relationship. That narrative is compatible with a selective presentation of the data. It is not compatible with the complete picture. The mortgage trap is real. It is tightening. It is doing so in specific geographies, in specific loan categories, in specific income brackets. It is doing so at a pace that a mortgage industry professional predicted in January would produce visible foreclosure acceleration beginning this quarter. It is doing so against a backdrop of housing prices that are beginning to decline nationally for the first time in over a decade. And it is doing so in an environment where the Federal Reserve cannot cut interest rates to provide relief, because inflation, driven by the oil shock of the Iran conflict, prevents the policy response that has historically interrupted these dynamics. The exit strategy from the mortgage trap is not a single action. It is a set of decisions calibrated to the specific position each person occupies in the system. For the stressed homeowner, the action is early contact with the servicer before the first missed payment to access loss mitigation options that exist and are required but are not volunteered. For the locked homeowner, the action is an honest assessment of whether the equity currently held in a declining price market is better preserved by acting before the 3-year AEI price decline compounds, or by holding and accepting the erosion. For the prospective buyer, the action is geographic discipline, focusing on Midwest and Northeast markets where the convergence of affordability, inventory constraints, and demographic demand is producing price stability rather than on Sun Belt markets, where the convergence of oversupply, insurance premium escalation, and price declines is eroding equity from the first day of ownership. For investors holding financial institution stocks with concentrated FHA and Sunbelt mortgage exposure, the action is the same analysis at scale, understanding which specific institutions hold the most concentrated exposure to the segment of the mortgage market where delinquency has already risen 6 times since 2021, and where the professional consensus is that foreclosure acceleration is beginning now. The banks will not tell you this. The data already has. If this video gave you the complete mortgage market picture that no single source assembles for retail investors and homeowners, subscribe right now, because this level of analysis is exactly what I deliver every single week. The next video is going to show you exactly which states and metropolitan areas are in the early stages of the foreclosure, acceleration that DLS servicing predicted for the second quarter of 2026, what the legal options are for homeowners in each stage of the delinquency timeline, and how to read the specific warning signs in your own mortgage servicer's communications that indicate your loan is being flagged for collection action before you receive a formal notice. That is the tactical map that follows the strategic diagnosis. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and watch it the moment it drops. The trap is tightening. The information in this video is how you navigate it.